Hello, and welcome to the TMZ podcast. I'm Charlie Neff.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
Wow, Derek in the house.
Must be something legal today. If you're sitting me in this
lots of legal
seat,
things today.
that's right. We got a lot to cover.
Absolutely. So some big stories we just broke on the website. We're going to be starting off with Justin Baldoni and his production company are suing Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, along with her publicist, for $400 million. We'll give you all the details on that. And then we'll be getting to Liam Payne's friend, Roger Norris, is suing Liam's dad for defamation. We'll tell you all about that. And lastly, we haven't heard from Wendy Wiliams in quite some time, but she did an interview and she talked about how she feels trapped in her conservatorship, and she's describing her life as being messed up. Woo!
This is a lot, and they're heavy stories too. We don't have any light palate cleansers. These are all big deal.
2025 is not starting off well. No. I want out. All right, let's get into it. So Justin Baldoni and his production company, Wayfair, they are suing Blake Lively. We knew this was coming. Remember, Blake Lively originally filed her own documents coming after Justin. Well, now Justin is kind of putting out his side, and boy, he came out swinging.
He really did. He's had his lawyer, it was on TMZ Live, Brian Friedman, who is like a very aggressive lawyer. He's been Pitbull on Justin's behalf, said the way this has been framed in the media is absolutely unfair to his client. He thinks the New York Times was fed a bunch of lies by Blake's people. And now he's showing all the receipts. This thing was a 180-page lawsuit, and it's got everything in it. But what we zeroed in on as a very, very interesting curveball wrinkle in this whole thing is the appearance of Taylor Swift. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so as you guys know, the movie that they were in together, It Ends With Us, is about a woman that falls in love with a guy, and that guy becomes the abuser, who Justin starred as, but he also directed and was helping writing the script. So Justin says in the documents he got the rights to turn the book into a movie, and he had promised the writer and I guess the woman that the book was based off of that he would be as true to the original tale or story as possible.
And she's a very famous writer. Colleen Hoover is a big writer. This was a big book, so a lot of people had expectations about what the movie would look like.
Yep, and so he claims that Blake Lively wanted to rewrite a very pivotal scene of the book/movie. And it's the scene where Blake's character meets Justin Baldoni's character on the rooftop for the first time. So according to Justin, Blake rewrote the scene, and to his surprise, the scene was nothing like the original way that it unfolded in the book and in real life.
And he takes a lot of pot shots. He says he was very passionate about this project. He corresponded with the author, Colleen Hoover, and he says Blake didn't even bother to read the book.
Right.
And took the script, saw it as a star vehicle, maybe saw it more as a rom-com. You can tell, I've seen this movie, the tone is a little weird. Do they want to go for a domestic violence survivor tale? Are they trying to make a rom-com? Is it a love story?
Right.
It's a little mishmash, and he's explaining that she got in there, rewrote this rooftop scene, which is critical to the whole movie. And he says when she did it, he pushed back. He said, this is not really the spirit of the scene. And then they had this meeting at the penthouse where Blake and Ryan Reynolds live. And he says he was essentially ambushed at that meeting. Now, there's another meeting that happens later, which is much more negative. This one is when they're still collaborating, and he says...
still talking about the scenes and rewrites and things like that.
He says he went in there, Ryan Reynolds starts gushing with praise about Blake Lively's rewrite. He says that meeting happened, and then a few hours later, Taylor Swift waltzes into the room and also gushes with praise over the rewrite of the scene. And he says, and his words in the lawsuit are pretty clear, he says, it was clear to me that I was being pressured to go with Blake Lively's rewrite. He then wrote to Blake Lively and said, listen, that meeting was cool. I liked your pages anyway. You didn't really need to. I liked your pages even before Taylor and Ryan came out to sort of sing their praises. So he felt as though he was being pressured. She responded and said, a very long text message, but in the text message she said, yeah, those are my two dragons. I'm like Khaleesi from Game of Thrones, and it's good to have dragons. The implication is that they come out and breathe fire to protect Blake Lively, this poor damsel in distress. And she's saying, they're my lovely little monsters. She has all these choice phrases that she's using. And he's saying it was clear I was being bullied.
Yeah. I mean, look, on one side, you can see like if you're a woman in Hollywood, you might feel like it's hard to get your point across or to be taken seriously. We do know that that has been a known narrative throughout Hollywood. So, possibly from Blake's side, she feels like, oh, I'm not being taken seriously. I put a lot of effort to it. I think this is how it should be. And she's turning to her friends, her tribe, to come and support her. I think all of us would support any one of our really good friends that we felt deserves recognition.
Yeah.
So on Blake's side, she's probably thinking, these are my allies. These are my team members that can help me get what I am looking to do for this movie. Obviously, they both had different views of what this movie should have been.
The dynamics are fascinating. You're right. On Blake's side, that she is fighting against a Hollywood that is maybe sort of more male-friendly and female voices are hard. On Justin's side, he would say, look, I'm Justin Baldoni. No one has heard of me. I have this small production studio. This is my passion project. I hired a star. Blake Lively is a superstar. She's married to Ryan Reynolds. She was coming on this movie, and he thinks that she was throwing her weight around to sort of influence his project. Yeah. And then he gets into how that all went down and questioning her weight and everything. It got very nasty. You can see the dynamics at our play. Probably some version of this is true in the middle because she's laid out a horrific smear campaign that she says she was subject to. He's laying out that he was the victim after everything sort of blew up on Blake. And what he's saying sort of makes a little sense because if you remember the timeline, she starts promoting the movie and she's also talking about her hair care line and her alcohol products.
Girls, come wear your florals to the movie. It was more like, oh, bring your girls.
Yes.
Like, this is fun to see. And for him, he kept, talking about domestic violence victims and how this movie is more of just like a movie. It's a cause. It's a
serious movie even.
Yes,
and she was promoting it like a rom-com. So there was a little bit of conflict. She took a lot of flack in the press for promoting it in this way. Then people pulled up old interviews where she looked a bit like a mean girl.
Yeah.
And he says in response to this, she tried to shift the narrative, got her heavyweight publicist to turn it on Justin Baldoni. And now he's saying, here are the receipts. Here's what really happened. $400 million is a massive number. It's a headline-grabbing number. It's going to be, he'll have to prove that up. But he is saying, like, she ended up pressuring to put her version of the movie. It did well, but not a huge blockbuster success.
Right.
And he's saying it cost him. This was his production studio, and he wanted it to be a massive hit. And says it didn't go that way because of Blake.
What did you think of the movie when you saw it?
I found it all over the place. I think it reflected the problems behind the scenes. I was like, am I watching like a cute rom-com where she's opening a flower shop and she's dressed all elegantly, or am I watching a domestic violence survivor story?
Right.
So I couldn't understand what tone they wanted. And now I see behind the scenes, each wanted a different tone. It was a mess.
It's funny because one of the things he pointed out in the documents is, Blake Lively was always talking about like, oh, come with your girls, wear your florals. And the wardrobe of her character was so important to her. And at one point, Justin claims that Blake Lively was telling him, my character needs $5,000 shoes. And he's like, your character owns a small business that's a flower shop. I don't think your character would be able to afford $5,000. She's like, oh, no. And apparently, according to him, the wardrobe budget just ballooned after that. And she kind of went overboard. I don't feel like the outfits were worth whatever they paid, but that was just such a big issue between them.
Do you get a sense, and then I'll leave it here, but like, he in this movie is a monster. He's the abuser. Right. He comes out in that rooftop scene and he like sort of throws a table. He's nasty. He's violent.
Throws her down the stairs.
Throws her down the stairs.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, it's a rough story.
Yeah.
She's obviously the victim.
Yes.
Does that play into how
people
we
are
perceive
viewing
him?
them?
Yeah. He's a monster in this movie. We don't know him well. He's not Tom Cruise, so he's not a hero in other movies.
Yeah.
This is all I've ever seen Justin Baldoni in, and I think of him in that monstrous role. But he's trying to set the record straight. He's saying, I was acting in this part.
Yes.
She was actually the monster behind the scenes, even though she's this damsel in distress in the movie.
And he even said in the lawsuit too, that he knew that he claims that he had heard she had a bad reputation, that she was very difficult to work with. And he says, but in the beginning, it was all friendly. We were friends. And he had included some text messages of them chumming it up, but then it turned south. So.
Yeah, it really did.
Really south. South Pole south.
South Pole, man. off the map.
Yeah. Moving on to another insane lawsuit. So Liam Payne's friend, Roger Norris, who, if you guys remember, Liam Payne's dad had accused Roger of promising that he would care for Liam during the last period of his life, which, authorities say Roger Norris had abandoned Liam they believe that Roger knew that Liam was not in a good state
Yes.
and just left him.
Yeah, as Argentina officials were building their case, who's to blame for Liam Payne's death, remember, Geoff Payne, who is Liam Payne's father, came out to Argentina and said, I'm going to cooperate with the officials. Well, the narrative that he gave them formed the centerpiece of how they're charging people. They charged some hotel officials, and they've charged Roger with these abandonment and things of that nature that you've heard. That's because Geoff gave them a story that Roger was in charge. Roger was supposed to look after the well-being of my son. Roger says that is an outright lie. You have defamed me and ruined my life. I mean, it really torpedoed his life. He's facing serious criminal charges. He says, I was never his caretaker. I never gave him recreational drugs, and I was never hired or paid to do anything to take care of him. To the contrary, what he says is he was actually living the months before his death with Kate Cassidy. He mentions her. Katie Cassidy or Kate Cassidy?
I think her name is Kate. She goes by Kate, but it might be Katie.
Got it. So he says he was living with Kate Cassidy. She might have known what his needs were and what his state of mind was. He says he had a bodyguard who was taking care of him and was a paid person. When that person was fired, he says Geoff Payne never hired a new guy to look after Liam. So he's really casting blame at everyone else. And he's saying at the end of the day, Liam was also an independent guy who was in and out of rehab.
30s.
No one could control him. So he's saying my reputation has been trashed largely by Geoff Payne helping the authorities build this case against me. And he's suing. And you can really understand why.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so hard, I think, for us to grasp because there's no abandonment law here.
Right.
You're kind of like on your own obviously we're gonna charge like drug dealers or things like
the
that.
Mac Miller cases and things like that when you give someone drugs and they die.
The abandonment part is so interesting to me. Obviously, Roger, he has always claimed his innocence. He's always said, I didn't know anything was wrong. When I left, he was fine. And then, and maybe that was the case. But when he did leave, we do know that Liam had a downward spiral. He was in the lobby of his hotel throwing his laptop. He had to be literally carried by the people that worked at the hotel up to his room, which we know how his death unfolded from there.
Yeah, look, Roger's being a little careful with his words. He says he doesn't do drugs and he never gave drugs, but they did drink whiskey that morning.
Which is not illegal.
Which is certainly not illegal, but he does know that his friend was a little bit on a bender. It'd be hard for him to say that he didn't know anything about Liam's deteriorating condition, even though he wasn't there for when he was dragged up to the hotel room and so forth. But Roger's in a tough spot. He feels like he's not looking for money. He says in this lawsuit, my reputation's destroyed. I'm obviously facing sort of criminal charges. If I get any money from this defamation, which he's saying Geoff Payne subjected him to, I want to give it to Liam's son, Bear. And that's at least a nice gesture that he's not money grubbing. He just wants his reputation back. He thinks it's unfair to blame him.
I can see why, and I think anybody can see why a father that is grieving would fly down and want justice for what happened to his son. I think there's a lot of people that are like, Liam was an adult. The only one to blame is him. But, the father and the family, they're coming out of a place of, what happened here? They're trying to get to the bottom of the truth. And, the father has just said, these are the people I think are in the wrong. And as like an Argentinian authority, I mean, it's got to be a lot of pressure too to have a grieving father saying like, I need some justice.
You're right. Look, a celebrity died in the middle of Buenos Aires. Those officials are under an extraordinary amount of pressure to find someone to blame. But it may be the case that there was really no one to blame. This is a tragedy. The hotel people locked him in his room. Everyone wants to point fingers at them. But this really comes down to, in my estimation, that he was a very sick individual. He was battling serious demons. And it's unfortunate how it all sort of played out in his untimely death, but not every time does someone need to go to prison over a death like this, is my personal take. But we'll see how it plays out. This is a big, big development.
Definitely. And our last story, Wendy Wiliams. Wow. So she was on the Breakfast Club. She gave her first interview in quite some time, and she opened up about the conservatorship that she's been in. And here's a little bit of what she had to say.
Well, first of all, to start with, my niece Alex knows a lot as well, but I am not cognitively impaired. You know what I'm saying? No, but I feel like I am in prison. You understand what I'm saying? My life is like up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
She's prepared for the fact that her phone might be taken away.
What if they take my phone? I won't be able to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Oh, so sad.
It's very emotional. She does, at the beginning of that clip, sound pretty lucid. She sounds coherent. She sounds like she's putting her thoughts together in an orderly fashion. She does break down emotionally at the end. You know, she was put into this guardianship in New York. They call them guardianships. It's roughly the same thing. And it was because there were findings that she had frontotemporal dementia, a serious brain condition that physicians had sort of diagnosed her with, and that they were worried she would be vulnerable to financial fraud and misdeeds by others around her if they didn't put someone in place to take care of her.
Wasn't there something with Wells Fargo, too, where they had flagged that they believed that people were trying to take advantage of her and her money, and they had flagged it, which I thought was kind of interesting as well.
That's what kicked this whole thing off, is Wells Fargo went to court and said, we're worried, we control some of her money, and we think that maybe someone is messing with her money. So this guardian was put in place. But, you know, there are limitations. You're taking away someone's freedom when you put them in a conservatorship or a guardianship. We knew this with Britney Spears.
Because it's like they're not capable of caring for themselves.
And usually they don't like it. You know, Britney Spears didn't like it because there are moments where you're lucid and you're like, I don't need this. You're resistant to it. It's a very, very sad situation. Courts don't do this lightly. She may be in it wrongfully. Maybe someone cooked this up and she should have more freedom. But it's hard for us to say because doctors looked at her as well.
Yeah, and also, like, I think a lot of people watched that Lifetime documentary that she was in, and it just didn't look good. She didn't look good.
Yeah, she had some drinking issues at the time. Maybe she's gotten those under control, but this is more her cognitive faculties, right?
Yeah, and just like seeing, like there was that one scene that always just like burns in my mind of her with Black China. Black China came to see her, and Wendy just looks like she's gone. You know, there's nothing behind the eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that just really worried a lot of people, but also kind of made people understand why she was under guardianship. And look, you guys kind of mentioned it earlier, like you can have dementia and have moments where you're lucid.
Very much.
Is this maybe one of those lucid moments?
Yep.
Unclear. We don't really know. But I mean, I do think a conservatorship or a guardianship isn't really considered a success if the person is unhappy.
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue because their happiness is maybe not as big of a concern as their safety.
Yeah.
And that's why the guardian comes in and says, I need to take care of you for your own good, even though you may not believe it to be in your own interest. It's a very sad situation is what it is. Britney Spears, we saw this, and her life, I wouldn't say has been a smooth path outside of the conservatorship, although she hasn't gotten hurt or anything like that either. So maybe she didn't need to be in one. She's just kooky. It's possible the same thing is true with Wendy Wiliams, and I am resistant to taking away someone's freedom if they can live their life, even if they have some limitations as they age. Very, very sad story. I don't know where this will go. There could be a groundswell of a free Wendy movement. You could see it kind of
people
starting
are already
to happen.
tweeting and stuff like, you know, the hashtag free Wendy and things like that. So, you know, we'll see if she does get in trouble for doing this interview and what kind of happens from there.
We'll stay on top of it.
Derek, thank you for joining me.
Always fun,
or
Charlie.
us, I guess I should say. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you tomorrow.